But when you get a Russian sense of humour, do you feel, I have come home, I do understand these people, these are my people?
No, I feel more Russian in England than I do in Russia, of course, because there I'm surrounded by the real thing. There I'm a foreigner, which I am in England too, but they're very discreet about it now. At my age, they claim me, quite right, except the other day I won a cultural prize in Germany called the Deutsche Kulturpreis, very honorable with long speeches, and it was very touching. But it was reported nowhere in England, of course, except in one paper. And somebody saw that and again came up to me rather like the old English journalist and said, "Why did they give you that? You're an entertainer, aren't you?" "Aren't you" was the only thing that hurt a bit.
Where did you learn to speak German and Russian and French and all the languages? I mean, you speak many more languages than those. Where did it come from?
Well, I don't know. I think it's just a musical ear, really, which is a completely untrained musical ear, because I'm no good at music, really, except the appreciation of it, but I can't play an instrument. I used to play the flute because there was an insufficiency of bad flutes in the school orchestra, and so I agreed to play one, but I played it only because you only have to follow one note at a time. You don't have, in the piano, I'm absolutely hopeless. So I don't really know, except that it amuses me the way language is formed and the way the mouth is formed as a consequence. And it interests me a great deal that my mouth is obviously formed internally for speaking English. Otherwise, I have to stiffen or do something curious with my face, which I can't afford to do. So when I talk in French on French television or in German on German television, I always have a slight accent and make mistakes because my face remains English. But if I pretend that I'm a French academician, si je vous parle français comme ça, très fleuri, très nuancé, well, if I can allowed to do that with my face, I can speak like a Frenchman or a German.
Yes, because Germany, your father was called von Ustinov, and isn't there a story about you as a little boy listening to conversations your father was having with men who were spies at the end of the war, the beginning of the war, during the war, and they thought you didn't understand, but you understood every single word?
Well, we had a very small flat, and it's very difficult to know what to do with a child if you're engaged in the Secret Service. And they always hoped that I didn't really understand. But, of course, my father came over here in 1921, and we had a very small flat. I'd just been born, and the walls were relatively thin in the kind of flat we could afford, and the telephone didn't work as it works now, so he had to scream his dispatches, because he was the representative of the German news agency in London. And I heard him next door really screaming these things at dictation speed. "Lloyd George hat heute im Unterhaus ges-" and on it went like that. And of course the result was that as a baby I slept very little, but I did learn German. Because it was like it was like a course, you know.
But you were a baby in arms. You couldn't possibly. Were you talking German?
When I started speaking German, suddenly my father went white as a sheet. And he said, "You don't know German?" And I spoke really fairly, I made mistakes, of course, but fairly fluently from the beginning, just from having heard him.
Did they see you as having a great talent? Did your parents try hard with you when they knew that they had this child who could speak these different languages, but also had gifts in other ways as well, musically as much as anything?
Well, my father always hoped that. I was an only child, and my father became very proud of me, at the same time rather aggressive towards me for various reasons. But he used to get me to imitate Hitler and things like that. I had to stand behind a curtain and do my party turn, which I hated doing. I was also always guests coming to see me in the bath when I was small. I hated that, of course. It's given me a feeling of aversion towards saunas and any other place of that sort. But he was a very gifted man, but with a love of the superficial. He thought nothing was worth anything unless it was superficial and entertaining. And he said, "Why do you try and write plays with meaning to them? I mean, what they want is to laugh." And he was exactly that. He was extremely talented at making people laugh. At the same time, I think there are certain children for whom a a difficult education is the best they can get. Either an English public school, which I really disliked very much, or my father, who tried to be more British than the British at a difficult period in history.
So do you blame your father for not maybe giving you the steel to just dedicate yourself, as a scientist might, as a musician might, as a writer might, to the one big thing in their lives? Because you spread your talents wonderfully over so many areas, but
No,
you haven't stayed to one, have
I
you?
certainly don't blame him for anything. In fact, it was he who made me extremely rigorous in certain respects, because my father was wonderfully gifted, and every now and then we all had to be quiet because he started writing a novel. And by the end of one day, he would have finished one page and then read it to anybody, including the milkman. Have you a moment? Would you come here? What do you think of this? And he would read the first page of a novel, which, of course, under those circumstances, never went beyond one page. And the drawer had about 8 or 10 novels of 1 page length, all of which he read to everybody. And when I actually had a play on for the first time at the Arts Theatre, and it had a very good press, he couldn't understand it. His question to me afterwards was very significant. He said, "How did you manage to finish it?" And I was cruel enough to say, by not reading the first page to every comer. I kept it to myself until the end, and he never understood that at all.
I want to ask you, before we're going to go to a break very shortly, but I want to ask you about the business of having nerves of steel to do what you do. You have completed an evening with Peter Ustinov, which has been filmed and will be shown in this country on television. You get up in the morning, you just do it. You don't worry about it, you don't fret about it, you just get up there and that's it.
No, I think the steel is perhaps the wrong analogy. I think it's extreme relaxation. Relaxation which can, because the concentration on the stage is a very light concentration, at the same time very intense one. But you're always conscious of what's going on in the audience, what's going on everywhere, so that you're like an insect with roving antennae, which don't really affect your thought processes because you've got enough to think about with the text. I played King Lear twice in Canada at the Stratford Festival. It was a very interesting feeling. I must say, terrified of going on the stage with 4.5 hours of text, and there's no guarantee. With a car nowadays, you switch it on, the little logos appear, and you know that everything is more or less working. There's no guarantee with a person that he's got anything confined to memory, and you hear this awful cocktail party noise through the microphones of the audience, which is waiting. And even out of that comes one, and you think, oh my God, that's part of the audience as well. Anyway, the curtain goes up, you go on as King Lear, and you say the first 3 or 4 lines extremely precisely and yet tentatively, and gradually the engine begins to warm up, and after 4.5 hours you collapse in a heap. At last you're dead. The worst is over, and you lie there, and as you lie there, of course, unfortunately in King Lear, there are about 7 pages after King Lear's death, which people speak extremely slowly, out of reverence for this terrible fact. And suddenly you begin to develop an itch on your ankle. You daren't move, and you suffer indescribable tortures because of this itch, which you can't reach with the other foot, because it would be seen. And the next night you resolve to avoid that by falling in such a way that your greatcoat covers your ankle. Ah, thank God. Now, if it happens again, I can very cautiously sneak the other one in. But what happens? The itch begins in your nostril. And so it goes on. I came to the conclusion the worst time I had in King Lear was the moments after I was dead, which took away all the terrors from the time before, because I had this coda to think of being inanimate.
I will never look at anyone playing King Lear again without remembering that. Let's take a break, Sir Peter Ustinov, because I want to talk to you about a lot more. We'll be back right after this.
Peter Ustinov for a look inside Crime TV with the producer of one of Russia's most popular television programs, which charts the spiraling growth